So hi, my name's John. I started in fire and EMS when I was 17 and a half. I was still a volunteer. I was a volunteer my senior year of high school. And from there I went on to work for the Prescott Hotshot crew in Arizona. Came back, started working for Carmel Regional Fire Ambulance, Peninsula Paramedics, Mid-Carmel Valley Fire as volunteers, and then finally Salinas Fire in 2003. I started there and then retired in 2014, I believe it was. Total was 23 years. The first time I was, the verbiage PTSD was used with me was when I had a bad call, and I finally told my captain about it, and I went and saw a counselor, and they diagnosed me as having post-traumatic stress disorder, and that was about a year prior to me being retired out. After that, it just once I was diagnosed and I realized what was going on, and the problems that I was having at home, and the lack of passion for the job, it kind of all went south after that, because I knew what was going on then, and the only way to empty your glass is to get away from that. Your glass gets full and there's only so much room in it, so you got to dump it out somewhere, and going to work every day does not allow you to do that. And in the fire service, or at least my experience in the fire service, it's not a very well accepted medical retirement. It's not something that people are going to admit to. It's a mental illness. It's an anxiety disorder. That doesn't go really well with being a fireman or a paramedic. I mean, they're counting on you to be able to think clearly. And if you're having a panic attack in the bathroom while the bell's going off, it doesn't help. So that to me was the first time I ever was introduced to PTSD. Of course, you hear it for the Vietnam vets and the military. It's standard to hear in the news all the time, but rarely do you hear about it in EMS and fire. And that's why I'm even willing to talk about it or be involved in something like this, is because I think it's important to get out the message, because the amount of people in first responder positions that are committing suicide, or that are depressed, that are losing their families, their homes, their cars, because your life stops. When you get to a certain point, you can't deal with anything but what's in front of you, and everything goes away. That's not healthy. I was lucky. My wife helped me recognize it. One of my old captains came to me one day and was like, "You're not the same person you used to be." And so I was forced to look at myself and accept some pretty hard realities, quite honestly. I mean, I never felt like I chose to be in fire and EMS. I felt like it kind of chose me, or you're drawn to something. When you talk to police, fire, dispatchers, paramedics, CMTs, there's always a fire for the job, for a reason. You're drawn to it. I didn't want to admit that I had PTSD. I didn't want to admit anything, but I also didn't want to lose my family, my life, or whatever, my job. So it was more important for me to be able to have my family still, have a life, and it was never a label of or it was never this is going to affect you and you're going to take this home. It was more like, you're going to see some shit and it's going to be gnarly, but that's it. I mean, you don't talk about it. You laugh about it, make a joke, and move on, and that works a lot of times. But there's going to be calls in your 30-year career, if you're lucky enough to make it, that will never go away, ever. So no, and quite honestly, I was so young when I started. I don't think it would have mattered to me at that point, honestly. Maybe if I was at 30 years old and I'd had a little bit more life experience and had seen some more tragedy, maybe it would have made a better impression, or a lasting impression. But at 17 and a half, 18 years old, it would have just been some guy talking to me, honestly. I wanted to be a fireman, and I didn't care what anybody was going to say. I never, ever had a thought cross my mind that anything would take me down, let alone PTSD. PTSD to me was a weakness. It was not something I wanted to admit, talk about, or anything else for a couple of reasons. One, it's a huge stigma to have a mental illness or an anxiety disorder, whatever label you want to put on it, in society alone, let alone in fire and EMS. You know, being a Sally's not really accepted too well. You know, there's a certain amount of machismo that you have to put forward, male or female, to survive in that world. And yeah, so no, I didn't think anything was going to take me down. I mean, I don't think anybody that worked with me thought anything was going to take me down either. It kind of ebbs and flows as time goes on. It gets better, just like anything. I mean, that stupid saying of time heals all, it really is true. It's been almost 4 years since I've actually run a call. Probably, I think it's about around there. So initially it was night sweats, night terrors, depression. Literally on my 4-day, I'd come home and I'd just go in my room. I wouldn't surf, I wouldn't exercise, I wouldn't do anything. I would just be in my room watching Netflix and just closed off to the world. And then as time went on, it kind of developed as going through the process of retirement in and of itself is stressful, especially a disability retirement where you don't know if you're going to get, you know, retired, or am I going to have to go work at freaking Walmart because I'm a paramedic and a fireman. I don't have many other skills. So that was stressful. So I think that honestly was when I started to notice the increase of anxiety, the respirations, and I mean, I'm having a full-blown panic attack where I've got a couple pupil spasms and things like that, but I can definitely feel my respirations increase, my heart rate increases. I usually flare up, and if, you know, I'll go super defensive, and you know, and as time's gone on, those have decreased, partly because of time and partly because I'm aware of it, and I work really hard to correct those things because I know that they're not set in reality. I'm projecting what I think should be happening, but the reality of it is that's not what's happening. I'm retired. I'm okay. I've got a great photography career going now. Everything's great. But that's not, you know, your mind doesn't think like that all the time. Your mind likes to tell you you're a piece of shit sometimes and let you spiral down. And so what I've learned, the most valuable things I've learned is that the way I think is the way I will feel. My wife, for one, is usually the first external person that will recognize it, but I just try and check in with myself every morning before I get out of bed. I just try and run through what I'm thankful for and kind of just check in with myself and see if anything's bothering me. Did I watch the news last night and I saw the guys from my old engine company go into a fire? That usually affects me. Or, you know, I don't really want to go and talk about, you know, I don't want to go over and even have a cup of coffee with the guys. It's painful, you know, and it's something that I can never do again. So I just try and kind of encapsulate myself into a different world, honestly, and into my own positive thinking, and, you know, fill my brain with art. Honestly, that's how I try and keep myself in check, is going out and shooting with friends or going out and shooting by myself, and that's how I keep myself in check now. It doesn't always work, but it's better than it was. Initially, the call that, you know, they deemed it as a cumulative effect, which PTSD is a cumulative effect. You know, if you think about it as an empty glass when you start, and every shitty call fills up your glass a little bit more. So my call was on March 23rd of 2011. I was a little kid, got shot in the head, and I just felt different. I felt different right then and there. He died in the air over Gilroy, which, you know, I can't do anything about that. I get that part. So I stayed at work. That was the first day of my 48. I stayed at work. I didn't say a word to anybody. Later on in the shift, I went to my captain. I said, "Hey, dude, do you feel different at all?" Just kind of off the cuff. "No, man, I'm good." Okay. So that was the end of it right there for seeking help at work for then. But I went home And probably 4 months later, I went and sought help on my own. I didn't want to tell EAP. I didn't want to turn it into a workman's comp. I didn't want to tip my boat. I loved my job. I was passionate about doing it. And I knew that when you open that can of worms, the potential for going back to work lessens. One, the older I got, I was 40 at the time. And two, it's not a broken bone. It doesn't heal in 6 weeks. You get therapy and you're back to work. It could take 10 years. It could never go away. It could take a year. So I didn't want to open that can of worms. So anyway, 4 months went by. I went and saw a counselor. She was a good counselor for sure. She had a nurse practitioner that worked for her who was a retired Chicago fireman. So I related very well to him. And initially that's why I even wanted to go see her, was to get to him. But he didn't do one-on-one with clients, unfortunately, because I felt like I could relate to him. He'd been in the trenches. He's been there before. He knows what it sounds like to have a mom screaming in your ear. He knows how hard the job can be. So I went to her for, I think, about 6 months or so, and realized that I couldn't relate to her, and she couldn't relate to me because she hadn't been there. So I went back to my captain and I said, hey man, I need help. And I asked him for help. And so I started the process of workman's comp, and I got referred to a really great doctor here in Pacific Grove, who's unfortunately now retired. I saw him for a full year, and I went back to work on the exact same day as I was retired. It was March 23rd, excuse me, not retired, but the last call had happened because of 4850 time. The way it works is 1 year off of work while you're getting paid, right? So I went back on March 23rd of 2012 and immediately had another traumatic event, if you want to call it that. It was a 40-year-old female who had hung herself, which in and of itself is wouldn't affect me usually in any way whatsoever. It's a choice that person had made. They're 40 years old. You can reason those things. It's the innocent stuff. But when I got there and started working this woman, I felt someone pulling on my collar. And when I turned around, it was a guy I had been going to school with since I was in 5th or 6th grade. And that was pretty much when I just reached up and pulled the flag and went, Cap, call the BC, I'm done. I'm done. And so I think by August or somewhere in there, I was pretty much, that was it. I didn't go back to work after that. So, those are the two that stick out. There are many, many traumatic events that I've seen, and mothers screaming and things like that have definitely affected me. But I think when I was younger, I processed things differently, and I didn't let it soak in and marinate as much. And that's not a good thing either, because you're not being real with yourself. The first way to start breaking down the walls of the stigma of PTSD in EMS and fire and police is to make it okay to talk about. If it's not okay to talk about in the station or behind your console or wherever your workspace is, then it's never going to change, because it's going to be a secret, me included. I kept that close. I did not want anybody to know that I was fucking broken in my brain. I didn't want people to know that. I mean, why would I? It's not a natural, comfortable feeling. But my advice to people that want to get into fire, police, EMS, or anything else is, you have to recognize that you are going to see things that you're not meant to see. You have to be able to talk about it. You have to have enough confidence in yourself to be able to say, hey, I need help. Because to me, my strength didn't come in until I asked for help. It was all me just hiding stuff until then. And I don't think there is any easy answer on how to avoid PTSD in the fire or in the service. Because you're going to see the calls, regardless of whether you work in a slow, 1,000 call department or you work in a 100,000 call department. over time, your glass is going to fill. The 100,000 call department, probably going to be pretty fast. The 1,000, you might get 30 years before you feel broken. But, you know, the only thing, the biggest thing I found is you got to be able to talk about it, and you've got to be able to change the culture of the people that you work with. And the only way you can do that is to get people on board. And typically people that just start out are not going to be able to see it yet because they haven't seen the tragedy. For me, my target audience would be about 5 years, because you've got, your glass isn't empty anymore at 5 years. Regardless of how busy you were, or how busy your ambulance or fire engine, whatever it is, how many calls you're running, at 5 years, you've seen at least one shitty thing that you don't want to see again. So to me, if we can change the guys or the gals at 5 years, or start to make them aware that it's okay, the people behind them that are coming in, the guys with 0 to 1 years, it's going to be okay for them to talk about it. It's going to be okay to ask about it. The guys that are at 10 years, you might still be able to capture with the guys that are at 5 years. You might. And that's how you change that culture. But really, you got to wait it out. It's not the dinosaurs, it's the eggs that they leave behind, is an old fire department saying. It's not the old crusty son of a bitch, 37-year-old or 37-year veteran fire captain. They're not going to change. But you got to watch out for those eggs that they're leaving behind too, because those guys are going to do the same thing. You've got to change the eggs. You got to get to those guys first, and make them realize that's all bullshit. All that stuff that 37-year vet's telling you, that's great. But what you're not seeing is him going home and drinking a fifth of Jack Daniels, or he's on his 3rd marriage, he doesn't talk to his kids, whatever the case may be. To me, my family's way more important than my job. I mean, that's it. The other thing is to have a really healthy balance of things that you do outside of work, because it's not a typical job, I get that, but working at in EMS, you know, you start to identify that as what you are and not as what you do sometimes. So I think that having a healthy balance, whether that's art, photography, surfing, working out, spending time with your family, but having something outside of that that you identify yourself with, rather than solely with whatever profession you've chosen, will help you in the long run, because it gives you a much better balance in life. But it also, if you do lose that profession, you don't also lose everything about your identity either. I didn't feel like I was all that wrapped up in it. I don't have a bunch of crap in my house that says I'm a fireman, and I don't have, you know, like a lot of guys do, I don't have a hydrant in my corner, and I don't have a stupid helmet lamp and all that shit. I don't have that. But man, it took me about a year. And even some days to this day, it still hurts, because I was proud to be a fireman, and I loved to go to work and do my job. So to me, you know, having a better balance, and I thought I did, I think would help you mitigate if you're in the situation that I'm in now, being retired at 43 years old with a disability. You know, you're not going to be so wrapped up in putting a uniform on, because that's not who you are. It's just what you do. It's a job. Really, it's a job in the end. It just happens to be a really awesome one. The first thing you have to do to not perpetuate the stigma of PTSD is to not perpetuate the stigma of PTSD and ask for help. You got to ask for help.